Hey everyone, and welcome to This Explainer. I am absolutely thrilled you're here today. We are going to be looking at a seriously fascinating framework drawn from the book 12 Steps to a Good Life. We're going to explore how you can master your major life choices by bypassing those tricky cognitive blind spots that, well, we all have. Because let's face it, living what the author calls a good life isn't about somehow avoiding hard choices. It's about navigating them with absolute, undeniable clarity. So, I want you to do something for me real quick. Bring a current anxiety-inducing decision to mind right now. You know the one. Take a second to really picture it. Maybe it's a huge career pivot, a crossroads in a relationship, or maybe a massive financial leap. Whatever it is, hold that specific choice in your head as we go through this explainer, because by the time we wrap up here, you are going to be ready to apply this exact framework to that very problem. You see, the biggest threat to making the right choice actually isn't a lack of intelligence. It's what's known as the assumption trap. The text points out that we often just suffocate in the tiny, rigid box of our own worldview. We look at the world through all these layers of unconscious beliefs and past experiences, and then we completely mistake that heavily filtered view for objective reality. For instance, you might assume, oh, I'm just bad at interviews simply because of one past failure. You end up mistaking that internal filter for an absolute truth about what you can do. But true freedom and true clarity, that only comes when we step completely outside of that box and deal with reality exactly as it is, totally free from our own limiting assumptions. Which brings us to a really crucial point. You simply cannot make a clear decision without facts. Relying on assumptions or just going with your first instinct is a fatal flaw when it comes to major life choices. We humans are incredibly adept at self-deception. We're sometimes lying to ourselves the vast majority of the time without even realizing it. Crazy, right? We rationalize, we deflect, and we justify. So to combat this deeply ingrained habit, we have to systematically and deliberately gather explicit data. We literally cannot assume we already know everything we need to know. Okay, let's dive into this. Here is the solution to all that decision paralysis, the 4 lenses of data gathering. We are going to run your big problem through facts and evidence, logic and reasoning, emotions and intuition, and finally, an outside perspective. All right, so first up is Section 1, Lenses 1 and 2, the analytical foundation. These 2 lenses are basically your grounded tools. They're what you need to separate cold, hard reality from all those swirling personal biases. Lens 1 is facts and evidence. This is what you know for sure. We're talking real-world data, hard numbers, explicit dates, verifiable records. Absolutely no guesses allowed here. If you don't know it for a verified fact, it just doesn't belong. Then we move right over to Lens 2, logic and reasoning. This is where we sit back and ask, okay, what makes sense based on those facts? We look at cause and effect and we draw reasonable conclusions based solely on the data. For example, a pure fact in Lens 1 might be, I've been passed over for a promotion twice in the last 3 years. The logic applied in Lens 2 is, all right, there is a verifiable pattern in my career progression at this company that needs addressing. It's that reasoning that binds those isolated facts together into a picture that actually makes sense. Moving right along to Lens 3, emotion and intuition. Now, you might be thinking, great, I've got my logic, I'm good to go. Well, not so fast. We absolutely cannot ignore our internal emotional state. Ignoring your emotions leads straight to self-sabotage, mostly because those feelings, they're going to end up driving your behavior anyway, just completely unconsciously. Look at this incredible quote from neuroscientist Antonio Damasio. We are not thinking machines that feel, we are feeling machines that think. This requires a massive paradigm shift for a lot of us. We have to stop viewing emotions as the enemy of logic. Our emotional and rational minds evolved together over eons. They aren't separated by some imaginary firewall in the brain. When we actually align our emotional insight with our logical reasoning, instead of constantly pitting them against each other, we become incredibly resilient decision makers. But, and this is a really critical distinction for Lens 3, we've got to treat those emotions as data. Think of them like the indicator lights on a car's dashboard. Feelings like stress, excitement, resistance, or relief are incredibly valuable warning lights. They almost always point toward unmet human needs or some unspoken concern. However, feelings are not literal facts. Just because the check engine light is on doesn't mean the car is instantly exploding, right? Just because you feel afraid doesn't mean you are actually in immediate danger. And hey, just because you feel guilty doesn't mean you actually did something wrong. It might just mean you're stepping outside your comfort zone and challenging an old, stubborn habit. We gather our emotions as data points to study and interpret, not as absolute truths that we just blindly obey. And finally, lens 4, the outside perspective. This final lens is literally the ultimate method for escaping your own personal biases and breaking out of the confines of your own mental box. Because remember, a problem rarely gets solved by the exact same consciousness that created it. We naturally justify our own nonsense and completely excuse our own blind spots. So the core question here is, what would a wise person say if I explain this to them? Honestly, I want you to ask yourself this right now about your problem. We have to seek out a truly neutral viewpoint to uncover the massive blind spots in our own one-sided thinking. You can absolutely go ask a trusted mentor, but the source material offers an even more fascinating tool if you don't happen to have someone immediately available to chat with. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is this imaginative exercise called the invisible counselor. If you don't have a mentor handy, this is gold. It was actually introduced way back in 1938 by Napoleon Hill. Basically, it involves turning to your own imagination to consult with personalities you consider to be incredibly wise and helpful, all in a mental meeting space. I know, it sounds a little out there, but it is a highly engaging, totally proven technique for reframing a problem. You are essentially crowdsourcing genius directly from your own subconscious mind. So how do we actually do this? Let's walk through the steps and see how it builds. First, you choose your role models. Second, you visualize a vivid meeting space. You really want to make this immersive. Imagine a majestic, super quiet boardroom, or hey, maybe just a comfortable armchair in a sunny living room. Picture the details. Feel the heavy weight of the mahogany table under your hands. Notice the lighting, the overall atmosphere. See yourself sitting there with absolute giants like Abraham Lincoln, Socrates, or maybe even a beloved former teacher. Third, you bring up your specific problem and you ask for their advice. And then you listen attentively. Try to actually hear the tone of their voice and the cadence of their speech as they reply back to you. And the best part? You have total freedom over who you invite into this space. It could be profound historical figures, former teachers or caregivers who shaped who you are, brilliant fictional characters, think Sherlock Holmes or Yoda, or even your higher power. With persistent practice, this completely stops feeling like you're just sitting around talking to yourself. These counselors will actually begin to take on their own distinct mannerisms right there in your mind's eye. They'll start providing surprising, totally unbiased insights. Why? Because this exercise quite literally forces your brain to step completely outside of its normal neural pathways and approach your problem from an entirely different set of values and perspectives than your own. All right, let's bring it all home. Navigating to a good life, putting the lenses to work. Let's tie this whole systematic process together. Navigating to a good life really isn't about having good luck. It's about structured data gathering. To summarize, making a truly clear decision requires checking all 4 of these boxes. First, you've got to eliminate your assumptions and gather hard, verifiable facts. Second, you must recognize the logical patterns and the cause and effect relationships that those facts create. Third, you absolutely must validate your emotions, treating them as crucial data pointing to unmet needs rather than undeniable literal facts. And finally, you have to seek wisdom outside your own worldview, whether you do that through a real-life mentor or the imaginative exercise of an invisible counselor. This structured process is exactly what leads us to our ultimate goal of clarity and peace of mind. Why? Because it completely bypasses those sneaky cognitive biases that usually keep us trapped. So, returning to that anxiety-inducing decision you brought to mind earlier, I'm going to leave you with this. Who is sitting in your invisible boardroom? Who are you going to call to the table to help you look through these 4 lenses? Gather your facts, trust the logic, map your emotions, and consult your counselors. You have the tools, and you now have the framework. Now, it's time to make the decision. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and keep learning.